guest topic?
Sure.
The top part. Okay. And then I'll do the guest intro and top.
So here we go. So just a second.
Slow there.
What's up? There we go. Are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show, the show that is dedicated to increasing brain, body, and mind resilience. You have this one wild and precious life, and you have just one brain, body, and heart that dictates the quality and direction of life. On this show, we have candid conversations about healing and increasing resilience, and I am your host, Dr. Sam, with my lovely co-host,
Dr. Lynn. And today we're going to be actually talking about holistic counseling and understanding the root cause and mental health issues with children and families, and especially with everybody's recovering from this last year in the pandemic. There's been, more openness and more willingness to be able to discuss conversations. And just checking in. Okay, perfect. Our producer is just checking in with us. So, in this time, I know that mental health is a major concern, and it's so wonderful that there are more conversations about it openly. There are more apps even and technologies to give people support. But one thing that we've noticed that there is still a limitation is getting the right counseling support for kids and families. And oftentimes, well-meaning parents are trying to look for the best support for their kids who may be struggling in school or maybe having some social anxiety or something even more severe, and just don't really know where to get started or to what questions to ask themselves. And so we're very fortunate today because we have the opportunity to learn from Dr. Montse Casado, and I am super grateful to be able to have her on the show. She's going to unravel this journey and just start to unpeel the layers of what are some things as parents, if you're considering finding support for your kids, or even for yourselves and trying to create a stronger bond during challenging times. She's going to unravel some of those ideas of how to find the right support. And she's been in practice for 20 years. She's a professor of counseling, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a play therapist as well too, and she's been in practice for 20 years. And so what a pleasure to be able to have you on the show, Dr. Casado. And so please tell us a little bit more, to give our audience a little bit more background in your experience and what led you to do what you do.
Sure. So when I started counseling, I think I started counseling really searching a little bit about myself and how to, like many other counselors, how to really deal with my own personal issues, having had a trauma background and trying to understand that and trying to heal my own trauma background. But I started as a school counselor working with children at the schools. And I really started learning soon that children work in a system, and whether it's the school system or whether it's the family system. And I really wanted to become a marriage and family therapist. So I started seeking that certification, wanting to help families, but really not understanding how was I going to be working with children. Initially, I wanted to work with adolescents, and then I realized, wait a minute, I love working with children. And I started taking classes in play therapy and discovered my passion. And I guess that's a piece that I feel very passionate, and I'm an advocate when I train counselors, and I have trained counselors for 17 years, is that if we're going to be working with children, we need to know how to work with children. Children are not miniature adults, and the therapeutic interventions that we use with children should be different than what we use with adults. So seeking play therapy training, I find that it's vital. Most counseling programs, they have very limited training as to how to work with children. So if a therapist wants to work with children, I find it a must that they find a play therapy certificate or that they take additional classes so they learn how to work with children. Because it is not the same to work with children than it is to work with adults. And I will also add, for me as a marriage and family therapist, and this is where I feel like my field has done a disservice to children and families. Very often we work with children and we forget to work with parents. And I always say, ultimately the children go back to parents. I don't keep the children in my office. So I do a disservice to parents if I'm not bringing parents into my session and helping them become better parents. I believe parents do the best they can until they know how to do different. So my role as a therapist is to really train parents how to do different. There's not such a thing as perfect parenting. We're all walking this imperfect parenting path, but when we fall, it's important for us to recognize I've fallen, how can I get up, how can I learn something different to help my child?
And so you mentioned play therapy quite a bit for our audience who's not really familiar with what play therapy is. Can you describe exactly, is that specifically for children? Is that the only way for children? And yeah, if you can just describe that a little bit.
So play therapy is created to be utilized with children, is where children don't have the words to express themselves, so they will express themselves through play, through playing, through toys, through therapeutic interventions that we use. It could be art, it could be music, it could be dance, it could be a dollhouse, it could be drawings, any of those modalities and more. I personally believe, and as a therapist I use this, play therapy, expressive arts, art therapy is for any age. It's not restricted to children. But other folks just specifically use it just with little ones.
What does a session look like if you're literally playing with the kid? How would a parent look at that and say, okay, this is beneficial for my child, this is helping them?
So here's the other piece that you're pointing out. My role as a play therapist is to help parents play with their kids and play intentionally, where kids can hear themselves, where parents can really connect and build safety and really help the child see that they see them, that they understand what they're going through. So there's a specific modality that's called TheraPlay, where we're teaching parents how to play purposefully with children. But for me, if I'm working with children, I would have a playroom where I would have a very selected toys that have been purposefully chosen to be used in a therapeutic manner. The interesting thing about COVID, we even have platforms now that offer like dollhouses, sand tray, interventions that you can use while still using an online platform. So we're I think there's a lot of great things that have happened as a result of COVID, that in many ways, some parents may be restricted to come to my office, and now they can do therapy from their own home. So that also facilitates some of this process for them.
Already I'm just thinking about our personal experience when we play with our son, and there's oftentimes that question as a parent, am I playing with my son in an intentional way, or having to be very mindful of our own actions or what we're saying, or even when purchasing toys?
Sure.
Are those the best helpful toys for our son? And I'm sure every parent, when they're shopping for something for their kiddos, there's some sort of educational tool behind it, but we don't realize that there very much can be this relationship component to it when you're picking a specific type of toy to play. So you bring up a particular factor in terms of building that relationship through play as well too.
Sure.
And I'm curious, in your training, because it sounds like you've worked with numerous counselors in your journey, as you're working with them, what is the foundational message you always let the counselors take away and when they work with their own personal clients and family and children?
Well, a little bit about what you were just referring about the play piece. I think it's important for parents to understand that children naturally will do these things. When we've had a natural disaster, children gravitate to playing out. Like, let's say when we had the Twin Towers collapse, children would recreate this, what they would watch on TV with their toys. Or they would draw a picture of the planes crashing into the towers. So this is not a foreign concept for children. This is a natural way of dealing with emotional issues and processing. What I think it's a little bit more different is us training parents to understand what that is. There's different theoretical orientations in play therapy. So when I teach my counselors, I always ask them to choose something that resonates with them, but also that they know what they're doing. I was thinking earlier this morning, I have a pet peeve that I believe that therapists need to be well trained, because the reality is when I have clients' lives in my hands, so I want to be intentional and responsible and ethical. But at the same time, I need to know where I'm going with whatever I'm doing. Like I know that when I'm asking a question, this question is leading to this place. So I want them to understand what it is that they're doing behind the scenes, because what they do will determine where the family goes. There's different paths to get to a destination, but which one is your path that you're taking? And to be mindful of that.
Absolutely. I remember actually, I listened to one of your recent podcasts that you participated in, and it was Life After PTSD. And it was a really great podcast in a sense that I got to learn more about just how other therapists are approaching PTSD. And you had briefly mentioned, or I think it was the host, had told a story about one of your interns that you taught.
The sand tray.
The sand tray, and just how, if you can kind of relay that story, just because I thought that was such a fascinating piece where we see just a lump, but kids are telling a totally different story of how they're relating to life.
Sure. So the sand tray is a therapeutic modality we use in play therapy with children or adults, where you have a box that has sand, and it may have there's a lot of theoretical explanation to it, but you have miniatures that represent the world, and you ask the person to build a picture of their world in the sand. So it's like a living drawing that emerges in the sand tray, and then you're asking the child to create it, but then you're asking them to explain to you what it is that it means, and even throughout therapy, depending on your theoretical orientation, you can even ask them to move from one scene to the next scene. But it gives power to the understanding that many times we have answers within. It's somebody else helping us find that answer, and that sometimes we don't even realize what is there because we're so close to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you bring in, sometimes we don't realize until because we're so close to it, but as parents too, we're so intimately tied to our own kids that sometimes we don't see past our own personal patterns. And I think that ties into wanting to get parents involved with care, with the sessions too.
Sure. Parents don't understand how the children even view them or how they feel about them. So a lot of these different interventions, whether it's the sand tray, the dollhouse drawings, or games that you may use in therapy, those can really give parents some insight about what's going on that they're not aware is going on.
And so what age group are you particularly specialized or like to focus with when you're talking about children?
For me, that has changed throughout the years. And if you ask me now, I would say pregnant women. I want to start before they even come into this world. Because if there is a time that, and there's no limit to age, obviously, but if there's a time that a baby is fully developing, that's when the mother is pregnant and they're in utero. I think people totally disregard the levels of how stress impacts a baby's mental health and physical health to both. So I want to do as much proactive work with parents for them to understand what attachment means, for them to understand what stress means to their bodies, high cortisol levels, how they affect brain development, the sensory issues with kids, all of that.
Absolutely. I think this is what we align so well, and like I find so much in learning from you when we have conversations. It's just because our philosophy, even when we talk to parents who are considering having kids, it's like your health should begin 3 or 6 months before even conception.
Exactly.
And so just even, during the pregnancy aspect, oftentimes when we talk to women who've gone through pregnancy, it's, how was your pregnancy? And moms would often answer, it was fine. And even though without really truly knowing, or we don't realize, like, actually it was really hard. We went through these challenges. This is what I was going through. There was these uncertainties that I had as pre-pregnancy. And not getting that right support. So what you're saying is,
Just birth is a very traumatic experience.
oh yes,
You know,
or even postpartum.
yes, all the hormonal changes that are
Yeah.
going on, the
Mhm.
not knowing how to help your baby,
Yeah.
the fact that many parents don't even know the effects of touch
Mhm.
on kids, the effects of brain stimulation through like cell phones and other things, or breastfeeding or not breastfeeding, what's going on with the family, all of those dynamics, how they impact the baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the simple power of skin-to-skin contact, which
Absolutely.
is tremendously
Right.
lost too.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I want to steer it away a little bit and actually ask about really what is the biggest disconnect you're noticing between parents and children? Because I mean, mental health is definitely at the forefront now with COVID, especially. It's really been brought to a lot of people's attention. So, but what are some of the biggest problems and biggest disconnects you're seeing with parents and children when it comes to trauma?
So I think as a culture we have a stigma about mental health. I think that COVID is opening some of these beliefs about it, but nonetheless, we still don't recognize that mental health. I often, when I work as a middle school counselor last year, I would ask my kids, how are you taking care of your mental health? Because mental health is not this external gift that somebody gives you. I mean, it's something that you practice, like how are you taking care of your physical health or your academic life. It's a lifestyle. It's what we do, whether we are eating, and this is a big piece for me, food plays such a critical role with mental health. Food allergies, food sensitivities play such a critical role with neurotransmitter function. And with behavioral outfits, outbursts that kids have. So I really want to help parents understand that we all have to work together in terms of raising our mental wellness. That this is something that we all need to do, like we exercise, like we try to eat a healthy diet. And the problem is that we live in a culture where people are really not focusing on wellness. It's a speedy culture where people are highly stressed out. They don't have time to cook. It's easier to go through the drive-through and grab something there, but they don't even realize the effects of those habits on themselves or their kids. How often are people watching TV, not even interacting with each other while they're having dinner?
Right.
You know, rather than connecting and building safety as a family.
Yeah. I want to backtrack just a little bit because I think Sam had asked a certain question in terms of disconnect to families and children with trauma.
Sure.
And then there's also mental health. And
Sure.
perhaps for the layperson, even for us too, you know, what is truly trauma? Is it, you know, oftentimes when we think of trauma, we think something that has been through abuse or through some sort of loss, something major. And how does that tie in with mental health?
Sure.
And I can clarify that a bit too, especially then maybe specifically for kids, because I think the big definition people would think of trauma for a kid is either a big physical event or even a divorce. But I'm sure there's little things that happen that people wouldn't recognize.
Again, trauma begins in utero. So if the mother is experiencing trauma, the fetus is experiencing trauma, and it greatly impacts brain development. I mean, we have plenty of studies that prove this. High cortisol levels, neurotransmitter function is different, which, by the way, we can do neurotransmitter testing and see even with babies where they stand as a result of a stressful pregnancy. But for me, trauma is a very overused term. It can mean different things. I mean, it can be sexual abuse, it can mean physical abuse, it can be verbal abuse, it can be emotional abuse. There's so many layers that can go under trauma. And for some kids, it's more than just one category. Is that many times I think with children, I think we adults disregard the impacts of trauma on kids. We think, well, they're not really understanding what this is. It's really not impacting them, that they just witnessed a big car accident while we were going home, or the COVID itself, which I believe it has been a traumatic experience for many children. Just this high sense of anxiety that everybody has been living.
100% agree.
And the thing that I think of families as, let's check the temperature in this family. What are the stress levels in this family that are really impacting everybody's nervous system?
Right.
I mean, you both work tremendously with the nervous system, with the vagus nerve, which, quite frankly, I don't know to what extent always therapists are mindful of this. For me, if I'm going to do a therapy session and I don't bring safety and some sort of calming down at the beginning of a session with a client, I don't think I'm going to get the same results. I think when our brains are completely dysregulated, it's very difficult for us to really accomplish what we need to accomplish because everybody's on guard.
Absolutely.
You know, their emotional brain is about to go into fight responses.
Right.
So we need to understand that how do we bring down safety, whether it's through breathing, whether it's through calming down the body with some body movement. I think movement is critical, and we don't even address that in therapy that much. And I think it's so, occupational therapy does such a beautiful job understanding that, or even understanding, does this child have sensory issues? But I think if we can look at a child and see, okay, let me look at your eyes, let me see how dilated your pupils are, let me see how much your body's shaking, let me touch your heart rate, feel your heart and see what I think your heart rate is, and let's do some bubbles together and breathe and calm you down, because I think sometimes, and children's lives are so stressful. What they have to do through school on a daily basis is so much more than what we had to do when we were in school. Seemed like now all of a sudden we're all going to be going to Harvard, so we need to train everybody. I look at 5-year-olds and what we expect from them in terms of reading and writing, and I'm like, this is unrealistic. This is not even something that and then what happens to a child's sense of self is like, they feel bad because they cannot accomplish something, when in reality this something is unattainable for most of these kids.
Yeah.
And we're not even looking at, does this child really even have some learning disabilities, or do they have ADHD? Schools are not some of the most calming places, the majority of them. So we're actually really dysregulated them. I love this book that's called Self-Rec, where the psychologist trains parents and teachers how to regulate your own kid. Oh, and let me not forget to say something. Who is the number one regulator of your child?
Themselves, right?
The mother.
The mother.
All of you.
All
The
of us.
mother, the father, the adult in
Yeah.
that child's
That's true.
life.
That's
So
true.
if we're not regulated,
Right.
how is our kid going to be regulated? And let's be honest, most of us are not regulated,
Right.
because we're in this speed race of trying to do a million things during the day for whatever reason.
I think we're starting to trend towards really diving deep into the holistic approach. That that is the focus of our show today too.
Yes.
And I think we started to Monse, you had actually started to actually introduce just so much of the disconnect from the education system. You mentioned briefly nutrition, and even just own parents, personal patterns that they may not be realizing that there's dysregulation there. I'd love to be able to dive deeper into that, but first we want to give a great shout out to our new sponsor, Neuro Solution, and this is with Dr. Brandon Crawford and his team. And they are amazing in terms of being able to educate practitioners and families alike. If we're talking about holistic health and approach, the laser itself, the Avant laser, has been a key in what we do in the office and how we utilize it at home. So Sam, I'd like for you to share your experience in using the laser with Neuro Solution and how that supported you.
Absolutely. So we're talking about tools and strategies in order to increase resilience and increase health, and even when we're talking about regulation, in terms of regulating, that's a big part of what the laser does. It's similar to adaptogenic herbs, where they talk about it either brings things up or brings things down. In research, laser therapy or photobiomodulation is referred to as the great regulator. So you're talking about regulating neural pathways. And for me, the two biggest impacts it's had on me is one, gut health, which we're going to talk about neurotransmitters and those things, and especially things like serotonin, your feel-good hormone, being developed in the gut. So making your gut healthier, for one, is going to impact your brain, as well as sleep, which I'm sure we'll touch on too. Getting good quality sleep is important because that's really going to impact you the next day. And that has changed, the laser really has changed my health tremendously in those two areas, in places I've struggled for a long time. So seriously, can't say enough about it. And I think I hit this every single time when we talk about the laser. It's only as good as the knowledge behind it. So having the support network, having this network of doctors that knows so much and can be a resource to how to use it is literally priceless.
I would have to say, absolutely, that's the value that we get from using
Mhm.
Neuro Solution is just the backing of really skilled practitioners who align with the holistic approach in the sense of understanding the importance of neurological brain health, understanding the importance of gut health and emotional health, and getting all the different practitioners come in from different backgrounds, from psychology to education to chiropractors and medical doctors, and there's always support there. And so, yeah, we're super proud to be able to have Neuro Solution as our sponsor for the show, and what an honor, truly. So we want to be able to give a great shout out to that. Now, moving into and continuing on with our show, we just starting to dig into, Dr. Monse, you had started to talk more about all these different facets that parents we may not necessarily consider. And so when we're talking about holistic counseling, what does that mean?
So what it means for me, and I mean, as a counselor, one of my, I guess, my flags that I try to carry is the fact that when we have a child who's dealing with mental health issues, I want to make sure that we don't do two things. One is that we blame this kid as there is something wrong with you, and I, as the parent, play no role in whatever is going on with you, because it takes two to tango. And for a child, when a child is dysregulated, there's something that I bring into this relationship. So that's why I find it critical to work with parents. But also, as a society, as a culture, I would love for us to really entertain the idea that when a child is dealing with some mental health issues and behavioral issues, let's look at what's underneath the surface. Let's look at what, and it's a multi-layer approach, because I don't think it's just one thing that's going on. But I hate the idea that we have 4-year-olds that we're putting on psychotropic medications and giving them some very significant diagnoses like bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder, and all of the list, when in reality we are failing these children. We are not addressing what the real issue is. And the real issue could be the fact that the parents are really struggling, they're fighting, there's domestic violence, there's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, drugs, alcohol. It could be the fact that that you have a child whose diet is absolutely horrendous and all they're eating is nothing nutritional, it's artificial and full of dyes and full of sugar and full of maybe foods that the child is allergic or sensitive to. Many kids are highly allergic to gluten and dairy, for instance, and it plays a critical role on gut health and on behavioral
Yes,
issues.
absolutely.
I mean, I have seen my kid and given her some red dyes and sugar, and just changed from being what I would consider a normal kid to not so normal kid. So, but parents many times, they feel pressured, and they don't really understand the role of food for children and adults. I think I would love for us to grow as a culture and really understand that food is a driving force between gut health and brain health, that the two are not separate.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I'm like, this is the big factor in what we do in the office, is talking about the importance of brain health, and not just about positive thinking, it's more about the actual physiological function of how brain and nervous system is regulating everything else. And there is this true relationship between brain and gut. So it's so important. So far you've outlined major factors that as parents we should really be focused on. And that's parents' own personal, mental, emotional health. And then there's also nutrition. There's also
attachment, the connection between parents and kids.
Bonding. And how does that, since you bring that up really briefly, what is bonding between parents and kids? Like, I feel like I'm really strongly bonded with my kiddo, and a lot of parents may think so too.
So bonding is when you're trying to build a secure, attached relationship with your children. When your children's brain can really come down because they know that you're going to take care of their needs, and they know that you're going to be there for them emotionally. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be there 100% of the times, because like Dr. Daniel Siegel reminds us, the whole brain child psychologist, we are imperfect parents. We will make mistakes as parents.
Yes.
But the important thing is that we can go back and repair whatever we fail. That we can teach our kids that, you know what, I need to redo myself. The way I talked to you a minute ago was not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Let's give ourselves an opportunity to teach our brains how to do it differently next time. And the fact that you're not just the one who's doing it wrong. I'm doing it wrong with you too sometimes.
Yeah. Oh man, that just gave me chills because in a sense we try, at least I feel like we're doing something right with Rivers, our son, who's 4 now, he just turned 4. And sometimes what I find is there may be times when I'm or Sam or we're both feeling stressed and we're feeling anxious about something, and then Rivers may be doing something and all of a sudden we snap at him, and then having to backtrack and say, listen, it wasn't you, Mom and Dad's just feeling this much tension, and it's okay for you to feel angry. So maybe as a counselor, I hope that is something that we're on the right path here.
You're teaching them emotional health
Yeah.
and how to also label feelings.
Yeah.
Because one of my issues is that I work with adults that have no understanding of what their emotional world is.
Yeah.
Because how are you feeling? Well, I don't really know. Or fine. Fine is not even a feeling.
No.
Okay? So let's look at what's underneath this fine when your body's not telling me that you're fine.
Sam has a fun, I always put him on the spot because
Yep.
he's the one that shares this acronym for FINE.
Oh, yes?
It's my favorite response when people give it to me. They're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, you know what FINE stands for? And they're like, what? I'm like, it's freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So when you tell me you're fine, something clearly is going on.
Exactly.
But you're not good when
Yeah,
you're saying fine.
Yeah.
And yeah, it definitely makes me think about even adults. And I mean, I've certainly been in these states where it's like you're just in a certain emotion for days, sometimes maybe even weeks. And I think about, especially with our son, watching his emotions change, and sometimes change so quickly. He can go from being really angry and upset about something, and then 2 minutes later he's totally happy again.
Sure,
Like,
sure.
imagine if adults could have some of that emotional flexibility where it's like, yeah, I get we have more burdens in our life, but being able to let some things go and regulate ourselves. It's like, look, it's not that big a deal about whatever happened. Okay, get back into the moment and smile.
I think it's hard for parents to say, okay, I'm going to give myself grace,
Sure.
and I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to let it go, and just acknowledge the fact that I'm an imperfect parent,
Sure.
and ultimately, that is okay as long as you are there for your children and you're trying to convey day in, day out, I am here for you.
Yeah.
And in fact, I just saw a quote this week that said, the best thing that you can give your children is you.
True.
Tina Bryson, who actually works with Dr. Daniel Siegel.
Absolutely.
Because parents, our kids nowadays, they are deprived of us. We all have so many responsibilities.
Yeah.
We have all these job expectations that we have to check. And we fail to recognize that our children are not on the same checklist than we are. And their needs are not our needs.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to put aside your needs for their needs.
I think that, and then I also see the limitation as we're starting to talk about this is parents have so much on their checklist that there's overwhelm, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
And so then it feeds into finding convenience in other aspects of life to make it hey, at least my kid's fed. Then we start to talk into nutrition. And so it just.
And
technology. I was going to say that was
I mean,
yes,
and then so yes,
Yes.
technology. I mean, as we're talking, the reality is we always have to have someone to watch our son, and technology right now is taking care of our son. But
absolutely. But I think even at home, though, you can think about, and I can think of examples from us, and even seeing other people where you're not really, nothing is going on, you're not doing anything, but you're on your phone, and you're scrolling through your phone, and your child's there doing whatever, and they're not getting mom or dad, because mom or dad is giving themselves to the phone.
Sure. And the fact that we are failing to acknowledge as parents the effects of electronics, whether it's the phone, whether it's the computer, whether it's, schools themselves are highly electromagnetic frequency places because of the way that they have their schools wired. And we fail to recognize, but even infants, I've seen infants in strollers that they're watching something, they're going for a walk, and they're watching a tablet. I'm like, why? We've been told about the time that a child can take through electronics in terms of not harming the brain, but nobody seems to be following any of these rules because it's not convenient. The fact that many parents fail to disconnect electromagnetic frequency at night, which is something easy to do.
And I think in that too, it's so many parents, every parent that we know who are listening in, who are wanting to do something, this is not a blame. This is not
at all.
it's not meant to be. This is, every parent is loving and well-meaning. I know that I could be making healthier choices in everything that I do. Like, it would break my heart if I knew there are certain things that, you know, and I'm self-conscious about too. I guess like the what you're pointing out is these are the disconnect that we don't recognize as parents or adults.
I think sometimes parents don't know. They do things because they don't know. I mean, my philosophy is parents do the best they can until they know how to do different.
Yeah.
So if I don't know how this is impacting my child's brain, I'm gonna let them play tablet for 5 hours without realizing that I'm creating an addiction here.
Yeah.
And I have seen it with, I mean, I've had kids in my office that they would be spending 10 hours playing Roblox, not socializing with anybody, being in a basement, which is one of the worst places you can be for environmental toxicity. And parents were fine, but this child wasn't fine. This child was depressed, this child was anxious, was addicted, lacked social skills, emotional regulation. And sometimes I think it's hard for parents to really, I think if there's something that we can all get better is to learn how to connect with our kids more and learn what is in their hearts.
Yeah.
What is it that they're not sharing with us that we need to have the courage to listen to?
I'd like for us to take our listeners to a journey, because you just described a kiddo who may be playing in a basement, and this may be something that oftentimes parents do. It's just like, go play, keep yourself busy. I'm busy doing something else, taking care of chores or whatever it is, right? Can you walk through what that journey is like in terms of parents recognizing there's something that I need to support my kid in right now, and how to perhaps maybe, I know that there's not clear linear steps, but some sort of structure in terms of what parents can do to evaluate, because we just brought about nutrition, we talked about technology, we talked about personal patterns that parents are limited with, and it's such a big thing. But how do we narrow it to take little bite-sized pieces for parents to start to find support for themselves and for their kids?
And I want to also guide you too, because you touched on it really quickly.
Yeah,
but
sure.
observing your kid, I think starting there. You mentioned some things.
Yeah.
Yes, observing them physically, how
So-
they're doing, how they're acting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think for me the first one is connection.
Yeah.
You need to connect with your children, because connection brings trust and brings safety. And without those, like I was referring earlier about why therapy works, is because hopefully we are bringing this into the therapeutic environment. We need to connect with our children more, so when they're struggling, they would be open to coming to you and saying, I'm really struggling with this. My friends are doing drugs, and I explore with them, and I don't know what to do now. Because so many kids feel like they cannot go to their parents, or they're struggling with sexual orientation issues, or they're struggling with the fact that somebody sexually abused them. Whatever it is, the repertoire is there, and it's there at a very early age, and this is what parents don't really realize. I used to think, these issues emerge in high school. No, they are very much out there in middle school. I think that our kids, what we used to consider appropriate developmentally, 10, 15 years ago, we're in a different developmental chart than what we were then. Our children know so much more. I mean, computers, cell phones have introduced so many things to them. YouTube, I mean, you never know who's gonna be after your kid. So I think connecting with them would be critical for me. Opening conversation. Ultimately, we are the ones who have the communication skills that they don't have. But it is by doing it that we're teaching them how to talk back with us and to others. Obviously, nutrition, as I was referring a minute ago. Doing play, doing some funny, silly things with them to lower stress levels and to really engage with one another. I mean, it seems like we've gotten away from playing because, again, we're so busy. You go to playgrounds, and because of COVID, now playgrounds are empty. There's nobody playing there. Oh, and by the way, we live in an era where kids have more toys than ever. I mean, we were at the playground yesterday, Sophia and I. We went to the playground twice. And she said to me, I'm bored. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, you figure it out. You're at the playground.
Yeah.
Well, can you play with me? And I said, yeah, I can play with you, but there's a bunch of kids here. Why don't you play with those kids? And I did ended up playing with her.
Yeah.
But I think our kids are hyper stimulated by their access to toys
Mhm.
and electronics.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful, at least where he's our kid's age right now. We go to the park. I bring a scooter and a soccer ball, and
Sure.
all he wants to do is throw sticks into the creek. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's healthy. That's
Yeah.
And that's another piece that you're bringing into nature.
Nature.
Mhm.
Nature is such a heart, a breathing, spirit regulator for all of us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And exercise. I mean, what does exercise? Children, we live in a society where children, I mean, we have an obesity epidemic, but children are walking and exercising less than ever.
Right.
Because they're sitting with technology. They're not even, if they're in the same room with their friends, they're not even talking face to face to their friends. They're talking through their cell phones.
I think one thing that when you talked about connection that I just thought of too, is just connection as parents to start observing ourselves more and connection with ourselves. Like I notice the times when I'm super overwhelmed and I still feel like I need to take my kiddo out because
Yes.
what are we gonna do? And I notice my own inhibitions or my own barrier to just get on the ground with him and play. Like I feel like there's this temptation to pull out my phone and now's the time to check my email or now's the time to work on my computer, even as we sit outside on the porch. Like you can play on your own as long as you're outside, you're okay.
Sure.
And it's realizing as we're talking, it's like, man, how am I connecting with myself too?
Mhm.
And I think I feel fortunate because I do have like some of the tools and background through meditation to just be aware and observe. But I feel like one component to add to that is adding connection with parents and connection with partners too.
Sure,
if you are
absolutely.
in a partner relationship as well
Yes.
too.
Or community, if you're not in a partner relationship, if you have a
Right.
single family,
Yeah.
single mom, or
Right.
single dad,
Yeah.
then how can we support them so they don't feel isolated?
Yeah.
But also, I'm going to take it one step back and talk a little bit about self-care.
Yeah.
And if you're not taking care of yourself, like, I mean, we all know from being on a plane, you're supposed to put your mask first
Right.
and take care of yourself. So how are parents taking care of themselves? Which, I mean, we all fall from this bandwagon. I mean, I do too.
Yeah.
So how do we take care of ourselves? Because when we take care of ourselves, we are in a different emotional state for our children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So sometimes we really need to also look at that,
Mhm.
because if we're all edgy and stressed out and anxious, or feeling really down for whatever reason, something has happened into your life, or you just had a fight with your partner, of course those things are going to impact how you relate with your child.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say checking in too, and that if it's hard for you to get down and play with your kid, then you probably need to do it a lot more.
Sure.
Right? Because it's like, how do I be silly? Like I think that's hard. That's really, really hard for a lot of adults to do.
Yeah.
Is being silly and being goofy with your kid.
Sure.
Yeah.
And,
I always say like Rivers is my little teacher, my
Oh,
little
absolutely.
Buddha, because
Absolutely.
it just brings out so much. I realized how removed or how unchildlike I was before Rivers came into my life, because it was just like singing ABC even, which just sounded foreign. Like as a kid, we'd sing it all the time and do
Yes,
whatever
yes.
and kind of be silly. And wow, how rigid I've grown up to the point where I realized, man, Rivers is so like you have to be all these different things, and that's what I appreciate in learning.
Absolutely. I think kids can be such a gift to us parents. I always say that I'm an extrovert because of my own kid.
Yeah.
I was not an extrovert, but also taking an opportunity to, even if you're in the playground, interact with other parents.
Yeah.
I have learned so much from listening to other parents.
Yeah.
And it gives you a sense of you're not alone, you're not the only one losing it, there's other people here losing it with you.
Yeah.
So.
And I know that this is another topic for another day, because I know that you're very passionate about mold exposure and environmental too, and I know that we're bringing in like a mountain there, but just really briefly, I just want to understand, how has your own personal journey as a parent and as a parent of an adoptee, how has that shaped your work and how you approach working with kids and in terms of, or even families in the holistic approach?
So, I mean, you're bringing up two issues, but the mold exposure piece, I think is critical for us to understand, and most clinicians don't even know how to, they know nothing about mold. There's a few psychiatrists and a few therapists that really recognize the impact, and it's not just mold. I mean, it's Lyme disease, it's other co-infections that really affect mental health. But the reality is that many homes are moldy, and many schools, probably even more than homes, are moldy. Schools are some of the most moldy places. So how does mold affect gut health and brain health? And of course, in my family, we're all mold patients. I mean, I had to pull my kid out of a moldy school a year ago when she started really, it's like, oh my gosh, she's one of us now. She's going to the bathroom a million times, and this is not normal, and she's super anxious, and her sensory issues have really blown up out of proportion. And really trying to understand, rather than medicate something, why is she doing this? And doing testing to unravel some of those issues. So anxiety is huge, and food allergies are huge when you have been exposed to mold and you react to mold. Not everybody reacts to mold.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I mean, this is for another day, but I mean, you also have children with pandas as a result of some of these environmental toxicities or other issues that create this constant brain inflammation. And I mean, and that has been a very difficult journey for me to go through and learn and realize that many people don't even know what I'm talking about, and friends or professionals. But yet I continue to be marching to find the answer and the healing that my child needs and that I need to be there for my child. In terms of adoption, for me, this is why I became a trust-based relational intervention therapist and educator, because I really felt like I needed to understand a model that focused on attachment and trauma. That I could look at my child and realize, okay, she brings a legacy with her that without me understanding what it is, just my love will not be enough. And that it is a journey, and you get into these Facebook groups with either parents of children with pandas or with mold issues or adoption issues or attachment issues, and you realize that there's an underground culture of parents who are terribly struggling and whose relationships are really being impacted by the amount of trauma that even those issues create for the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we can go so deep in
Yes.
any of these rabbit holes here, and there's such rich topics and so needed. I think just the biggest takeaway is for parents to realize, for listeners to realize too, environmental, where we're living, and all makes a big factor in terms as well too. And then tying it back into technology too. What environment? Yes, mold. And the other aspect I think too is what we're listening to, what we're watching, what we're hearing, what conversations we're having around the house. You know, I think that's really important as well too.
It's another level of toxicity.
Yeah.
If you have parents that are fighting all the time, cursing all the time, of course that's going to impact the child, because the child is going to live in their fear brain.
Right.
And they're not able to really, their neurotransmitters are going to be toxic to their own brain.
Right. So for your clients that are coming to see you, should they start with, how do you assess what they should go first en route in terms of tools? Because there's so many. It sounds like nutrition, it could be brain health, it could be environmental.
Sure. So I would do a very in-depth evaluation with them in terms of really understanding, do I feel like this child, I mean, I would ask obviously physical health issues, because physical health is related to a lot of food sensitivities and food allergies. I certainly would be asking questions about trauma. I'd be asking, how was your pregnancy?
Right.
Which many therapists do not ask this question. What was going on, even if they say fine, what was going on at the time that you were pregnant?
Right.
Oh yeah, my husband lost his job and we had to relocate 3 times and we were really struggling financially. You were not fine.
Right.
How were you sleeping?
Or you were fine,
Yeah.
but you didn't know what it meant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. All of it.
All of that.
Yeah.
I mean, if I feel like the child needs to have neurotransmitter testing done, obviously I would do that. Just to have this is the piece that I don't understand as a therapist, is that we work with children's brain and we have no understanding of what's really going on in their brain. I mean, you too, in your practice with all of the tools that you have, you can really see what's going on in a child's brain. I mean, you don't have a report, a neurotransmitter report, but you have tools that give you function of the brain. But therapists don't have any of that. Psychiatrists don't have any of that unless you're going to see Dr. Daniel Amen, and he's doing brain mapping, which I wish everybody was doing that. So I always joke that I would love to have this tool that they can put their hand in my office and it would allow me to read their brain. Because it's like, oh, I would have a completely different understanding of this person.
Yeah.
How much sleep, how many hours do they spend doing electronics? What are their social relationships, their emotional support, family, friends? All of those things for me to understand what's going on. The school system, some children are extremely abused in school because of bullying. Bullying is a critical issue in schools nowadays. I mean, I've experienced several of kids, not in my school, but then I volunteer, children that took their lives, and I'm talking from elementary to middle to high school. So it's not like, there's a lot of things that children are dealing nowadays.
Yeah.
And I hope that as a community, that we all take more of ownership of what's going on with our kids. Let's ask our kids, what's going on in your world? What is going on with your friends? What is going on with you? What would you wish somebody would know about you?
Right, yeah. And so for the parents who are listening, when should they be prompted to reach out for help? Because sometimes we don't realize that the problem's in front of us, or we're the problem, or something, there's a disconnect with our kids. When should we seek out for help? When should we look for support?
Obviously, when a child is struggling mood-wise, I mean, whether it's they're super hyperactive, they're almost manic, or they're struggling with anxiety, with depression, their grades are failing, they're talking about, I wish I was dead, or they have these very abrupt emotional changes. They go from being like fine to like, oh my God, my child just transformed into Beauty and the Beast. What is going on here? I think that's a time to reach out and trying to understand what else is going on here. But I think also that requires that parent ask themselves, what is going on with us? What is going on with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
How else can a parent approach their child to find out what's going on? Because I can imagine a parent listening to this and saying, okay, that sounds good. And you go, hey, son, how is everything? Oh, it's fine, Dad. Leave me alone. Because you've basically been that kind of parent for a while, just kind of hands off. So you're going to probably face rejection at first, but how can they break through that to then start to create a connection with their kid?
I mean, one of the things I meant to say earlier that I love about play therapy is the fact that it is a projective tool. So it provides some safety. So if I'm drawing over here, I'm not talking from here, which is a little bit more scary. I would ask parents to ask their kids, draw a picture of what's going on in your world. I mean, some may have access to a centroid, but some may not. Because you would be shocked to see what kids put out in a picture because they don't really understand what they're really putting out in a picture. Or write a story about what's going on in your world. I mean, for me, having a child who struggles with PANS issues, I can tell you, when she's in a PANS episode, her drawings are completely different drawings. She regresses to a place that is these very strange characters, and I have kept pictures because I'm fascinated by drawings as evidence of like, she's giving me a different picture of what's going on inside her brain for me to be more mindful as to what I need to be doing with her, my level of patience with her, rather than snapping out and say, get over it, which doesn't really work.
Definitely not for anybody. Just get over it. You're fine. Yeah.
But I want to say one thing for parents. There is such a plethora of resources out there.
Right.
I mean, videos, podcasts, Facebook groups. I mean, even if you don't have the financial resources to seek therapy, join one of these communities so you don't feel like you're marching alone, that you have a community of people who, have tons of knowledge, sometimes even more than medical doctors, I have to say, because they are constantly researching. And they're the ones that have lived it and have an understanding of what you're living. But they can be, but there's so many wonderful groups out there, and books, and again, videos, and trainings, and seminars that, I would take advantage of that. Even if you're in the car, obviously you don't want to do this when you have your kid in your car. You want to be connecting with your child. You don't want to have two people you listening to the podcast and they're looking through their cell phone. And I mean, even if it is, tell me about what your highlight was yesterday at school. What was one thing that made you smile? Just enter that kind of conversation that is safe. You're not talking about, tell me about your, the last fight that you had with your friends.
Yeah. I feel like listening to you is like, okay, what assignment am I going to give myself to better connect with rivers today, and like just to be more mindful about even when we're just driving our son to school. And I'd like to be able to put that out there too for our listeners, because this is an opportunity. I hope that there's something that you guys are picking up, and I hope, you know, maybe as an assignment for all of us as parents is how are we connecting with our kids? How can we pick one little thing, activity that we can connect with our kids?
And I would add, nighttime is a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
As we're putting our kids to sleep. I mean, for me, my child really struggles with sleep issues, so putting her to sleep is not an easy task, but that's a great time to really help them calm down and help us connect so they can even sleep better through the night.
Yeah.
Because there's a sense of safety for all.
I was going to ask, I'm like, what do you do to connect with, you know,
Books
Sophia?
are wonderful, you know. I mean, I haven't written this down, but I have created so many made-up stories with her. I have a play therapist friend that says, I hope you're writing down your stories. And I'm like, no, I'm not, and I should. Because they always have some therapeutic meaning in them. But Sophia is also very demanding with her stories. I don't like that. Can you change the story? Can you have this? Sophia has a voice. And she uses it.
That's so cute. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I am so grateful for our time together, and you know, what are you listed one is to connect with your kids at night to read, and then what are two other activities you would say to suggest to our listeners to start to build a stronger bond with their kids?
I would say food, the food we eat, but also spending some time either preparing or eating this food, because it's another great opportunity to connect to your, I mean, my child has been cooking things for the last 2 years. I'm not too, I mean, I am concerned, but at the same time, I let her use knives and I let her cook, because I think it's a great opportunity to feel good about herself, but also to realize that we're a partnership, we're a family, we do things together, it's everybody else's responsibility. So certainly that, and also just saying, hey, I'm paying attention to them. I noticed that you're really low today, you're not talking, what's going on? Tell me what's going on.
I'm going to throw another one out there, movement.
Of course, absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Like going out for a walk with your kids, or going to the park.
Even if it's 10 minutes.
Even if it's 10 minutes.
I want to put one out there as well too, is if you have as a parent something that you really absolutely love to do. In my case, I love practicing yoga. I don't get to practice every single day, right? But when I do, I try to wake up early enough in the morning, and sometimes Rivers will wake up at the same time. And I used to be very mindful, or think, oh, I just need to go somewhere so I can have that privacy, or I need to just stop practicing now or stop moving now or doing something that I like because my son's awake. And the reality is, can I try and do certain movements and not be so strict on having to do a certain way or certain exercise, and just be open for my kid to see, and he'll come and climb on me and use me like as a slide or a toy or something, or he'll crawl under me as I'm doing movements, and I feel like that's our bonding time too. And my thought is like, at least I'm sharing that story, like, hey, yoga's available to you too. And
and you may be teaching yoga to him too, but also your temperature is coming down in terms of being not stressed, so that's mirroring in him the stress levels. I mean, we mirror each other's emotional dysregulation or regulation.
Oh, yeah. Mirror neurons are a real thing.
Exactly.
Right. Totally.
Exactly.
Absolutely there.
Well, Dr. Casado, how can we find you? How can our audience find you and follow you?
So my Facebook page is Montserrat Casado, and my email address is mcasadoquijo@gmail.com.
Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll post it on our comments section. So if you have any questions, if you feel drawn to our talk today, which I feel so drawn to, and I know Sam is, all of us are, it's so relevant and so much needed, please do send Dr. Casado a message and see if, I know you're just a wealth of resources and information. So
Mhm. Thank you.
even just our time where I'm working with you, I've learned a lot as a practitioner. And then for us, if you'd like to follow and keep up to date with activities that we're doing at Wild and Precious Optimal Living, follow us at Wild Precious Optimal Living. It's in the back here. And for Neuro Solutions, another shout out to our sponsor again. You can find them on neuro-solution.com. So we'll post that as well on our comment section as well too. And what's the question we always love to ask our audience, Dr. Sam?
Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, and we will see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.